What are some of your early experiences with horror, specifically Latin horror?
Oh man, you should go first.
All right, let's go. Like, I think the first, for me, I think art has always been big in my life, right? So I remember from a young age seeing the artwork of Jose Posada. Is anybody familiar with Jose Posada? He's an amazing artist. He did a lot of print work, he did a lot of engravings, but he's one of the most well-known Mexican artists of all time just because his subject matter, right? He drew a lot of like skeletons and skulls and whatnot, but I think what stood out to me was, even though the images inherently are horrific because they're just like skeleton people or just skeletons, a lot of them seem to be smiling, right? And that goes back to what I was talking about before, where it's truly a merger of like both worlds, right? We have this macabre horror, but they seem to be happy doing what they do, right? So somewhere along the line, you start asking yourself as a person, is death really a bad thing, or is this, being afraid, is it a bad thing? So I think his artwork really resonated with me, and and also from an early age, I was also introduced to the work of Jorge Luis Borges. Again, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but I don't really consider him a horror writer, but in terms of fantasy, folklore, I think it's really resonant because he did a lot of work talking about like mirrors and labyrinths and dreams, right? So that like eventually led me to love people like Neil Gaiman and Sandman and whatnot, which is totally horror. But yeah.
I think aside from my nanny who taught me about the prayers and the angels and devils, her husband, my grandfather Tati, we would watch El Santo movies. And so we would go to the drive-ins and they would show El Santo movies, and El Santo versus Frankenstein, El Santo versus the Vampira. And I saw my grandfather get such a joy out of those action movies that I had this also, that I kind of enjoyed them as well, an attachment of horror as fun and not necessarily as terrifying. But as far as the terrifying part, I do remember I did have a nightmare as a very little kid of wandering through a graveyard and feeling how I was being followed, and then I turned around very quickly, and right behind a tree I saw a forked tail like go behind the tree, like the devil had been stalking me. And it was after all these stories my grandmother had been saying that the devil's just waiting for his chance to get you if you misbehave. And I woke up in a sweat, and my aunt, I was at her house, so she stayed and she prayed with me, which only made me feel that it was more real because of how intense her prayers were. So that was my kind of like my intense part.
I think when I was a kid, I was really religious because it was exciting to believe in a world that was magical, because religion gives you permission to believe in like miracles and devils and angels and stuff, and that was exciting. And as I got older, I sort of got less into like the literal reality of the Bible, but I really liked the idea that it was a story that helped me interact with the world, and a story that equipped me to deal with horror and fear and taught me lessons. And I started to read stuff that like wasn't as religious, like just general fiction stuff. And the idea that fiction had that power was exciting. So the fact that we can write folklore stories, it feels like a sequel to the Bible for me. It feels like writing religion. Like I can pilot these myths that are older than me and older than the country and even older than like the Spanish language, back to Nahuatl and stuff. And like the fact that I can write that's more exciting than writing. I've written like The Flash and Superman and Batman and stuff, but like those guys I know aren't real, like right? So but these ones maybe are, and they were like really believed in, and we have like grandmas that are afraid of them, and that's really funny. Yeah. So I'm engaging in myth and in that way is an interesting thing. And also like humanizing Latino people via comics to the rest of the community is really important right now. In an era where we're called like animals and criminals and stuff, like having stuff that's not just like Mayans where we're like biker gangs is exciting, like having just general people, because fear unites us, right? And fear is a unifying human factor. And like I feel like if in horror movies you have to band together, everybody has to band together. You and your Republican friend who has a crossbow have to fight the zombies. So horror really unifies people.
Yeah, and it's also not like something that only is in one area, because of all the way our peoples have blended throughout the Southwest. A lot of stuff in El Paso, it's a border town, so we have Mexican myths and then together with Native American myths that are blended together. So a lot of these things and all of our stories that we're now going to be writing down, and have artists who are creating these stories, is to share that it's very much a shared mythology that has that we want to share verbally and visually now. That was one of the things that a few years ago, before I met Eric, and I was really interested in doing some kind of property about a whale sharing her stories, passing the tradition down. I couldn't find a lot of written material on these stories, and I called UCLA and I asked one of the professors there, am I looking in the wrong places? And he said, no, they're really, because of just it's just the way the culture is, that all these stories were for generations passed down verbally and not documented in writing. And so now I'm really excited that we're going to be able to do that, and some of it with our own spin, but it's based in our tradition.
I'm glad you mentioned that a lot of these traditions have been passed down orally, because again, us as a people, we communicate with each other, and it's right. You can find books on folklores or Latino fantasies and fairy tales, but a lot of them are actually just books edited by people that recall the stories that were told to them. Mm-hmm. So they're recounting them. So again, they're a secondhand story to us, but it's been passed down to generation. And that's the beautiful thing about these stories, right? They've been told over and over and over again, and they exist, but nobody's really ever tapped into them, right? And you know, us as Latinos, we have these fantastic stories that we can share and express, and we should be doing that. So anybody that is in this audience and is thinking about doing that, I do urge you to do that yourself.
Yeah, and in like American culture, stories are currency, right? We can't get enough of like books and TV shows and movies and stuff. And as a guy who works for like DC Comics and Archie Comics and heavy metal, like big corporate sellout stuff, I have a choice in what I want to create with my time, right? I can elevate stories from 1938 about like rich white guys, or I can tell our stories and elevate our stories and keep ours going and make sure that ours don't die. So there's sort of a little bit of a culture war on the comic book stands of like what's demanding your attention, and it's exciting to represent like Chicano stories and Latinx stories and have that right alongside, not tearing anybody else's stuff down, because I still want to take your money and have those jobs, but like having it alongside Justice League and Avengers is very exciting, because it's equal, it's relevant.
And working in TV and film right now, I mean, all the studios are really pushing inclusion right now, in front of and behind the camera, which doesn't mean cutting other people out. It means giving other people who haven't had that chance a chance to step up and to work alongside everybody else and to speak alongside everybody else and share their stories. And that's very much what I think is really why this is a great opportunity for us to get our stories out too.
Yeah.
And so we talked about how a lot of mythology is passed down orally. So like I'm sure that they described what these creatures look like. When doing them in a medium like comic book, it's always very visual.
Yeah.
So how do you come about the idea of how to design these creatures?
There's a lot of pressure there, right? Because it's giving a face to something that we all know already, so that's pretty terrifying. That's all on our artists, so I get to pass all the blame off onto them, which is very nice.
Yeah, we give very general notes about our stories take place in different times, in different eras, so we get to do that. But it's up to the artists. Like we'll give them general notes of like what the Latino traditional devil looks like, you know, what the imagery is.
So that one, like, the devil usually has chicken feet, and like Mexican folklore and in Chicano folklore, he has like little chicken feet instead of like goat's hooves.
Yeah.
And that's really like funny and peculiar to me, and I don't think a lot of people know that. Like sometimes you see like old ladies with chicken feet amulets, and that's why. It's because it's to be like, it's okay, the devil, I'm one of you. Like, it's to trick them. Yeah. And in my neighborhood, there's a Botanica, and they sell brass chicken feet amulets. And I think it's for, like, vegan witches, which is, like, that's the funniest thing in the world. I love it so much.
Yeah, so it really is just to us coming down to what we have in our memories of how the stories are passed down to us and just giving very general outlines and letting the artists run with it.
Cool. I have had some artists feel freaked out when they're drawing it. They like feel like something's looking over their shoulder and be like making sure they're getting it right, or like they're summing it into reality by drawing it. Like get like goosebumps drawing in the dark, and that's really cool to me. Unless they get killed, then it's not cool anymore.
Yeah, for me it's a little bit different, just because part of the goal with Criaturas is that I want to focus on and do the lesser known folklore characters. And yeah, you know, Eric knows, but Eric is like hardcore about this stuff, right? And there's like not a lot of people that have heard.
It's all right.
So it doesn't, I mean, sometimes I say I want to do the Steve Bone, and I'm like, I've never heard of that person. Okay, cool. Let me tell you a little bit about them, right? Or I'm doing a Sombrerón, right? And for those of you who don't know, he's essentially like this little troll that's like in a little mariachi suit, and he has a silver guitar, and he goes around playing music for like young women in the countryside, right? And it's very much the idea of like a siren, right? You know, when a siren sings a beautiful song and the sailors crash against the rocks, this dude like plays beautiful music and young women fall in love with him. But here's the catch, right? It's usually the young women with long hair, right? So this dude's real creepy, goes around the ranches and he like braids like horses' manes and tails and whatnot. But so he's just like obsessed with young, beautiful women with long hair. But again, there are illustrations of the character, but for me it's like, okay, this is an opportunity to take a lesser known character and kind of do some character design work, because, you know, for me, I went to film school, right? And there was a time when I really thought I was gonna be like a special effects person. So it's like, I really used to kind of create monsters in my head and what they would look like, right? So I actually just gave the note to the artist that did like all the promo work. It's like, well, you know, I like to think subtextually and like in symbols and whatnot. What would this troll look like? And, you know, not to offend anybody, I basically told him he would look like a stumpy penis, right? He would have like a lot of flaccid, veiny skin, and that was just my vision of him, right? If this is a guy who's going around seducing women, that's what he would look like, because that's what he's thinking with, was his penis, right? So again, I apologize if anybody's offended out there, but that's just my answer to Pete's question. So be careful what you ask, Pete, because you never know what you'll get.
I know, apparently.
I'm glad you brought up like countryside, because my family, my mom's side, my grandma, who I've been talking about, they come from a large family. They had a farm out in New Mexico, and so a lot of these stories were told from their neighbors, from the farmers out there. So being out kind of in an isolated area is like the perfect place for these stories to kind of like.
And I mean, that's kind of classic horror, right? Like,
yeah.
The isolated places, right? You know, where no one's out there to help you, right? I mean, that's what made like a movie like The Hills Have Eyes such a classic film. It's just like a family in an RV, and there's crazy mutant people that are attacking them, right?
I think it's also residual guilt for like taking over the land too.
Oh,
Because
yeah,
you feel like
definitely.
in places where there aren't like a bunch of buildings, you feel like the natural things are still there, and the natural things are these creatures.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of like guilt there, and that weaves into like the indigenous origins of some of these like Aztec myths too. The Savone freaks me out, the whistler, because like one of the ideas with him is that the further away you hear the whistling, the closer he is to
Oh,
you.
that's the scariest part.
Yeah, so I hate it. So there's a guy outside my window who's like lives in the alley and whistles to himself all the time, and I always feel like it's like really quiet to not bother anybody, but I feel like he's like right behind me. Then, like, so I'm like, oh god! Like as a 31-year-old man, I'm like holding my lightsaber all the time. Ladies.